So let's get some analysis of the GDP numbers today. Also that meeting of the Industrial Relations Roundtables. Warren Hogan, UTS Professor of Economics and former ANZ Chief Economist. What did you make of the GDP figures? We're in the first recession now for nearly 3 decades, Warren.
Yeah, good afternoon, Kieran. It looks like we are. Looks like we entered recession sometime in the March quarter, probably towards the end of it, and all due to this pandemic. We did have the full impact of the bushfires in the quarter. But it really was the pandemic which started to really hit economic activity towards the end, which is caused the big fall in economic activity. It looks like it's a recession we couldn't avoid. The last recession was the one we had to have, but we couldn't dodge this one. It was inflicted upon us by events beyond our control. And it's resulted in a big fall in private sector economic activity, offset by somewhat of a rise in net exports, making a contribution, and government spending making a strong contribution in the quarter. Now, how are we going to judge this recession? It's going to be all about when we can get back to our pre-recession levels of output, how many jobs are lost, how many businesses fail, and unfortunately at this early stage we don't have a lot of visibility on all of those things.
So what do these numbers tell us about the economic downturn and the challenges that we face now getting out of it?
Yeah, well, I think the numbers today were pretty much as expected. They're highlighting that the worst is yet to come. We're going to find out how bad the shock was when we get the Q2 numbers. Some good news, though. It looks like the government and the RBA's initial assessment of Q2 GDP falling by about 10% is too pessimistic. The governor himself has mentioned that. But looking at these numbers, there's a big offset from these government stimulus programs, particularly in terms of household income. And the ABS did some analysis in there and showed how much of a boost household income and presumably, therefore, spending in the economy is getting from JobSeeker, and in the June quarter will be JobKeeper. So I think the downturn is not going to be 10%. It's probably going to be more like 6 to 8%, something like that, which is still phenomenal. I mean, we had a 0.3% fall for the March quarter, and we're going to get a 6 to 8% fall in Q2, which means also we got a long way back. We've got a lot of strong growth to get into this economy over the year or two ahead in order just to get back to where we were. But I think the other point that the numbers show today and that level of government stimulus that's coming through households, through the assistance payments that the government's put in place, the JobKeeper program, is that we face a problem when these programs end. And I know that's now pretty much the debate and will be addressed by government, but we are facing an economy that is essentially on life support, and we've got to get it off life support before we can say we've got a sort of a healthy economy once again.
Okay, so in that context, we've seen the Treasurer delay his next economic statement from June to July. They're wrapping up the review of JobKeeper into that. What needs to be his policy focus at that update?
Yeah, well, it looks like we've essentially got an old-style mini-budget on our hands in July now, where we're going to have an economic update, and I presume it'll be a full-blown update from Treasury. And we got policy in there. So, I mean, if it looks like a mini-budget, sounds like a mini-budget, let's call it a mini-budget. And it's important. So I think, there's two policy focuses to be thinking about here is how do we manage the downturn, which is what JobKeeper, JobSeeker, all that's about is making sure we limit the damage to the economy right now. And we're doing a good job of that. But what are they going to do with those programs? How are they going to phase them out gradually rather than suddenly as currently legislated? We'll get insight into all of that. And they do need to phase it out gradually. They're talking about it more explicitly now. But there's another element here, which the discussions today down in Canberra around IR are all about, which is what's the 5 to 10 year view for this economy? It's reset time for Australia. Globally, there is so much going on. It's a much more difficult world out there. And that's also got to be part of this statement. At least some early insights about government thinking for the business community, for planning purposes. And we're getting that in terms of these 5 working groups. The manufacturing sector is a big part of that. So I think we're going to get more insight on all of that. And hopefully we'll see that long-term view, really be the prominent part of what governments are coming up with over the next 6 months.
Yeah, given that reset, the necessity for it, as Dominic Perrottet says, it's an obligation, not an opportunity for reform. You have said to me before, you believe that they need to be bold, they need to make significant changes now to put this economy, this budget, but the economy broadly on and the most efficient footing that they can right now?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it is a matter of necessity, and the decisions made now will have huge implications for how well our economy and our society does over the decade ahead. And if we continue to put the broader economy on government life support, if we fund the economy through the accumulation of government debt, that's going to get us nowhere, and it'll just be kicking the can down the road. And indeed, a lot of governments all around the world have been doing that for 2 decades now, and they are in huge economic problems. I'm referring to Japan and Europe mainly on that front. We need to make sure that we refresh this economy, and it's everything from the IR discussions today to what are our critical industries and how do we support those in a very competitive global marketplace. And also to get the skills in there. I think the government is rightly focused on this, and I think this is the missing piece, is not just about education and training in its traditional sense, but how do we reskill and upskill our existing workforce to make them agile for a technologically enabled world that we're looking at in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense, and hopefully this time there is some real material change on that, because there's been talk about it for so long, but never really the cohesive national agenda that we need on that front of skills. Finally, on industrial relations, what do you see as the key elements to make this work and to get some of those hundreds of thousands of people that have lost their jobs back into work as soon as possible?
Well, I think just getting the conversation across all the main stakeholders happening and keeping that going is critical, because, unlike the Accord era, it's not quite clear what the main focus is. Back then it was about, getting inflation down and showing some wage restraints, getting some productivity gains, and it was part of a big reform package. I mean, it is about creating jobs, but, how do we go about that? What are the platforms? And we're not going to work that out just yet. So IR is absolutely critical, but again, it is part of that skills question. It is about how we make sure there's enough flexibility and enough incentive in the labour market while still being able to look after people when they're dislodged and reskill them. So it's a very complex set of circumstances, and I'd say more complex than the 1980s. And the key is getting unions, business and government all together trying to work out a solution and parking ideology. And quite frankly, I think that is a huge task, and I remain sceptical at this stage.
Warren Hogan, we appreciate your insights as always. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Kieran.